Cassandra started to pace about her chamber. She could not invent an escape from this. Impatient hands would no longer need to scratch and peck and wrestle her into submission. She was pinned. The proverbial chains of the engagement had not even begun to cool from their tempering, and already they had been fastened about her wrists, burned and singed with ember-hot frustration. She lost her will to fight. Tarragon mustered the strength to turn to her, hopeful that she might have an answer. Cassandra, I think it would be best if you left now, Tarragon. I cannot say no. She stared straight into his pleading eyes and barked. Go. I want to be alone. I want to go to sleep. Nothing had hurt him as much as the look in her eyes. Something awful was happening inside her. She would not open up to him, and he doubted very much that she had anyone else to whom she could turn. Suddenly she was at his side. She tugged at his collar, wrenched him from the floor, and threw him toward the door. Leave! Her tone danced irregularly and was incapable of keeping any emotional facade for longer than one statement. Please just leave. With one last shove, Tarragon found himself in the empty hall outside the princess's bedroom. There was a low clink as the lock dropped and closed her off from him. He stared into the wrought iron scrollwork which fastened together the wooden planks of her door, and he drew, in the shadowy recesses of his heart, dismal comparisons between himself and the black nails that studded it. Courage took time to muster. He approached the door and pressed his warm palm against it. Cassandra? There was no answer. Cassandra, I know I should just let you be right now. I will go in just a moment. I just want you to know that, how could he put this, that I would be honored if you would accept the Queen's proposal. He spoke faster, hoping to get it all out before she became too angry. It is not that I want you to compromise, but it is just that, well, I do like you. There was still no response. I mean it. I'm going now, he said, and pounded the sincerity of his point into the door. Cassandra was doubled over. She gasped, but her breaths were not enough to fight the tears streaming down her cheeks. The lingering sweetness and ecstatic titillations of the Venetian chagrins were washed away by the salted drops that stained her tongue. Now she tasted everything as it went wrong in the world. I do like you. His words were muffled by the wood. I like you too, she mouthed back, incapable of summoning the strength to pronounce the thought. Liking one another was not the problem, though. It was his complacency which disturbed her. Cassandra needed him to want to play, to do something extreme or dramatic. She could find satisfaction if he provided her some uncertainty. Complacency and obedience, however, left no room for change, no capacity for upheaval or opportunity for impulse, those things on which she thrived. She could never reveal her disgust with him. He would only change to please her, the exact opposite of what she wanted. How could he catch her when it was now from him that she ran? Where could she escape now that her refuge had become her shackle? Were there still doors which she could break through into the summer sun? Could she ever again hear the secrets whispered by the winds as they whipped through the shattered walls of ruins? It was not worth the effort. Her adventure was planned, and like he had said, it was not real if it was planned. Cassandra stood. She stumbled from the door to the vanity. Betrothed? She mused. The practice was absolutely plebeian. She had more fantasies of being sold into slavery than of being promised like a human. She fondled through the forest of perfume bottles, brushes, waxy pigments, and cosmetics, but no amount of care would mask her pain this time. Then her fingers pressed against the paper pony. The heat of curiosity began to dry her tears, and she sniffed the remnants away. This was not here when she had left. This was alien, artistic, intricate, and involved. She could escape into those folds. She perused the creases, tried to think it apart, intellectually undress it. She peeled the mane from the thick neck, untwisted the hooves, and slipped the ankles from their muscular shoulders. The paper was coarse, a mat of thick woven threads that rustled and crackled like fire as she fondled through the folds. In a matter of moments, the diminutive steed who had pranced across the marble valleys of her dressing table was transformed into a wrinkled, wretched scrap of murky blue parchment. She pinched the edges of the paper and tugged tensely on either end to erase the ridges and bruises that branched across the sheet. This was the craft of a dedicated artisan, evidenced by the precision folds and the wispy, frayed edges where the hand-rolled paper had been flawlessly torn. The artist had even been so kind as to scribble some prose in a dizzying, hypnotic swirl that dove from the edge of the sheet and twirled toward the center. The gasping tears had dried, and her painted lips opened for a breath as she began to rotate the page and read the poem. It strode over the shadows of silver moonlit wheat, and rolled into the valley with hooves that the ground beat. It passed right by the mountains that thrust forth their mighty peaks, and into water-colored skies with rolling clouds that leap. Separated from its herd, it trotted off alone, and brothers, sisters wept for that which had gone on its own. They never knew the better of them staying on behind, for lost in the winter was their brethren neighing kind. The silky silver mane it wore whistled as it trotted in, and stole a space amid my dreams on petty wings of whim. It told me of the distant lands of its marble-colored kin, and whispered secret sentences stuffed with subtle sins. Distant and darling as I was, and prone to its sweet song, I jumped upon its bare saddle and rode it on along, out up and through my window to the water-colored sky, and into distant rolling clouds that wept as we flew by. Over marble mountains into distant lands we strode, away from the worries that had caused me so much woe. Together soon we came to be away from brethren kind, and were lost amid midnight fogs of winter silver rye. Cassandra was entranced with the twisted tale. She continued, and there it was it threw me from its gloomy graying back, landing I on sharpened rocks with a painful aching crack. And as I lay there dying on my stony silver bed, I wept as it did leave me there to die and leave me dead. The earth rolled over in its sleep, and Cassandra was suddenly thrown to the warping tile floor. She peeled herself from the tiles and looked about her rumbling room. The tassels and fringe on the canopy's drape swayed. The jewelry, which had been indiscriminately abandoned on the marble vanity, jingled and rattled. Her shoulders locked. She held her breath. An awful wave of dread swept into the room and coiled tight around her. The fiery instinct of survival drew her up onto her feet, begging her to escape the chaos that was enveloping her. She leaned forward, reached for the iron lock that stood between her and escape. The air was shattered by 1,000 cracks of thunder just as she took a step. The looming echo screeched like claws scratching slate, and the vibration resonated through her body. The pitch burrowed itself into her ears like metallic worms, screwed and spliced her mind on twisted burning threads. The squeal was too much to bear, and Cassandra dropped to her knees. She pressed her hands to her ears, trying desperately to lock out the atmosphere's unceasing wail. The pain that riddled her body finally exploded within her, and she matched the air's cry with her own. Terracon was searching for the strength to leave the hallway outside her door. He lingered in a strange limbo, simultaneously hoping that she could settle this matter on her own, but afraid of the means she might utilize. He leaned against the wall between two flickering sconces and rummaged through his memories for any indication of what to do. What witty line would his mother rattle off in this scenario? What tactic would his father employ? They offered no inspiration, however. There was a muffled thump from the other side of the door. Was she coming out? Perhaps he should leave now before she discovered him waiting there. There was a dull groan, but the door was not moving. A comfortable silence relieved him of any further paranoia. Perhaps she just dropped something, or fell into her bed. His imagination erased the wall that stood between them. He pictured her readying herself for bed. He reasoned he was being a voyeur, and guilt rebuilt the wall between them. A shrill scream resounded through the door, and all playfulness faded. Terracon was suddenly infused with fear. "Cassandra, are you all right?" "Terracon!" she screamed, then gasped for a fresh breath, but they had all been burned away by the scorching vacuum that was consuming her. Sweat traced down her face, tickled while it hung momentarily from her brow, then stung when it dripped into her eyes. Terracon jostled the handle. The curling battens and iron lock rattled, but the mechanisms were as secure as ever. How was he going to get in? He pounded on the door, but it would not budge. He threw himself against it, but his effort was futile. Another painful moan was muffled by the wood. Terrakan stepped back. He pushed his weight against the hallway's opposite wall, then threw himself at the door. The thud of the door slamming into the jamb was loud enough to break through the high-pitched, burning howl that had consumed Cassandra. She looked up as the wooden planks pulsed from the blows, but could barely make out Terrakan's muffled calling to her. Over and over again Terrakan crashed his blooded shoulder into the door. The wood wobbled, but the lock held fast. Terrakan stepped back from the futility of his effort to study the door for any possible weakness. The iron plates that scrolled from the hinges across the boards could be pried off, but he lacked any makeshift crowbar and could scrounge nothing effective from the sparsely decorated hall. If only he could reach through and unlock the door from inside. Terrakan's eyes suddenly lit with hope. He took a breath, closed his eyes, and pressed his palm against the door. The wood's chill was burned away. The polished grain dried and cracked. Terrakan imagined the planks blacken before him. His hand flushed to a translucent pink as it masked a bright glow growing in the wood. The door began to rustle. With a loud crack, Terrakan bore his fingers through a smoldering layer of gray ash and orange embers, outlined by a ring of black singe. Cassandra ground her teeth, tried to bite back the pain welling up around her, and prayed that Terrakan might make it through. The blistering noise had deafened her to every sound. She could only watch. The door stopped pounding. She could only wait. A black speck gnawed its way through the boards. It poured across the wood like spilled ink, then began to crisp and flake. Veins of orange and red light pulsed through the expanding cracks. The wood splintered. Red-hot embers exploded across the room. Terrakan's fist had punched through the door. He patted for the latch. His fingers traced the iron bar. He lifted the mechanism, swung open the door. Terrakan stared into the room while he wrestled his arm out from the smoldering cavity. Cassandra's expression puzzled him. She had fallen to her knees and was clenching her ears, shuddering and twitching as though she was mad. Cassandra? She mouthed something inaudible. He knelt beside her and slowly reached out to take her hands from her head. What is wrong? A violent spasm threw her suddenly vacant stare toward the ceiling. Her mouth was wide with a muted scream. Terrakan lunged, but failed to catch her. His open hands bulleted through her. His fingers raked her skin into billowy puffs. She was rent into wafts and plumes of silver smoke. Terrakan flailed and reared back, curled himself into a tight, shuddering knot at one end of the room. His thoughts suffocated under the heavy blanket of fear as the details of her features darkened. Veins of murky midnight fog pulsed through her, leaving only the petrified silhouette of the suffering princess. Terrakan collected the shattered fragments of his sanity and crawled back to her side. He lifted his hand to caress her. His pale pink fingernails vanished beneath her darkening skin, and the vacant sensation at the palm played cruel games on his mind. Midnight zephyrs poured through the open window, frisked Terrakan's hair, and traced chilly kisses against the back of his neck. The wind pitched, and tendrils of shadowy smoke were sucked from Cassandra. Terrakan threw his arms around the mass of charcoal fumes, desperately tried to clutch her as the strange vacuums dragged her out through the open window. The last threads of the black fog were raked by his clawed hands. He dashed over to the window and leaned on the sill to look out. His cinnamon eyes darted back and forth as he searched the sky for any sign of the princess. The purple dome of night was still spotted with the storm's remnant clouds, like children who dawdled after their mother. Each was molded in some unique way, a soaring falcon, a creeping worm, a trotting steed. There was nothing outstanding about that stormy summer sky, and as the hot coils of instinct released, Terrakan's anxious heart sank back into the realm of reason. Slowly he retreated back into the room and closed the window's green-paned glass casements. Alone he could do nothing more. Terrakan slammed the door shut behind him, then bolted down the hallway. Every passed sconce whirled his shadow dizzyingly around him, waltzed it to the quick rhythm of his racing tread. He rolled around the bend in the corridor, then dashed to Osmara's bedroom. The large double doors grew as he approached. Throwing the whole of his weight onto the iron handles, he slammed into the room. The intricate tracery in the towering arched window cast lacy shadows across the empty chamber. Tarakan fumed his disappointment. Of course the rooms were empty. They would be guarded if she or any of her children had retired for the night. He ran on. The doors to the royal suite flung open, and Tarakan crashed into a long, dark, vaulted hallway. The two young members of the Order of Mercedes, who guarded the large, arched door, stared astonished from beneath their brimmed helmets. "The Queen. Where did she go?" Tarakan demanded. The pudgier of the two was quickest to answer. "Her Majesty left with Lord Nasu." He pointed down the corridor. "That way only a short time ago." Tarakan trotted down the hall backward, pointing as he commanded, "Let no one in the suite until I return with Queen Osmara." He then turned and sped past the decorative arcading, deeper into the shadowy passage. The spiral staircase rotated sickeningly in its descent, and Tarakan slipped several times as he juggled down the wedge-shaped steps. What could Nasu and Osmara possibly have to do at this late hour? Tarakan crashed into the base of the stairwell. His tread drummed down the labyrinthine halls. "Her Majesty, have you seen her?" "Heading toward the sanctuary with the Lord Vizier," a corset-wrapped noblewoman offered with a curious leer. Tarakan followed her cue. He yanked madly on the golden rings of the sanctuary's ebony doors. The lock rattled. Tarakan was refused entry. Exhausted, he dropped his brow to the wood with a dull thud. He rolled to lean back against the door, took a moment to catch his breath and reflect. The door clambered, then heaved open just enough for a little girl's head to poke through. She stared up at Tarakan from behind fattened cheeks, smiled, and said, "There is no more festival today, so you can go home." Tarakan's violent pull on the closing door shook the little girl loose. "Queen Osmara, is she here?" His voice penetrated the empty nave and echoed in the side aisles. An acolyte, recognizable from the white skirt and topknot, approached from deeper within the temple. He patted the girl on the head to excuse her from the door, then took her place. "Is there something I can help you with?" he asked in the disenchanted tone common to the priests. "Is Queen Osmara here?" Tarakan begged. "She is taking tea with the Hierophant." "Bring me to her," Tarakan demanded. "I'm sorry, but nothing." His echo rattled through the empty chamber. The acolyte's mascara-lined eyes pinched with insult, but he led Tarakan further down the hall nonetheless. The captain was invited into another room where three soldiers were crouched on their halberds and chatting amongst themselves. Upon Tarakan's approach, they snapped to attention. The one nearest the next door attempted to herald the captain's approach with a knock, but Tarakan ordered him aside and barged into the room. Osmara and Nasu sat across from one another over a small oval table with a steaming pot of tea between them. Lantern light glinted off Osmara's diadem as she turned to look up through the haze of incense. Immediately she could see the distress on Tarakan's face. "Tarakan, what is it?" she asked while replacing her cup to the tray. "Cassandra has been taken." "What?" There was an air of disbelief in her voice. Nasu just pressed the black ceramic vessel to his sipping lips. "Something happened after I left her this evening. I do not know what, but I saw her disappear. She is gone." Osmara's eyes ballooned with fright. She threw herself from the table, and her skirt hissed as she chased Tarakan back to the princess's chamber.